welcome. In today's video, which is the second in a three-part installment, I'll be making a Harvey's Girl uniform. If you're unfamiliar with the Harvey Girls, I went into a more detailed history and explanation in the first video in this series. For a quick recap, the Harvey Girls were the waitresses at the Fred Harvey chain of restaurants, a chain of restaurants in the American West, which operated from the late 1870s, early 1880s, up until the 1960s. The Harvey Girls' story and legacy were immortalized in the 1946 MGM musical starring Judy Garland entitled The Harvey Girls. There's also been multiple books written about them, and I'll link a couple below. As the title of this video suggests, this video will be about making the skirt. Hope you enjoyed this video, as well as the last video in this series, which will be about making the iconic apron. The first step in this making of process was to cut out all my pieces from my chosen fabric, a black organic cotton medium weight twill. The pattern I'm using is Truly Victorian's 1898 walking skirt pattern, which is really simple to construct and consists of a front, side, back, and back piece, as well as hem facing and a waistband. Now all these pieces were then ironed in preparation for assembly. Before I started assembly, I realized I was about to commit the sewing sin of not adding pockets. Therefore, I turned to Janet Arnold's Patterns of Fashion 2 and opened it up to her 1898 extant pattern and drafted a pocket pattern, which you see me doing here. Now this particular pocket gets attached at the side seam as well as the waistband, which helps control the strain of the pocket and keeps it from sagging, thus protecting the lines of the skirt. Also, it is worth noting that I can place a phone and 2 pairs of sewing shears comfortably in one of these pockets. Now let's move on to the assembly, which was very simple given that the skirt consists of straight seams. I pinned the side fronts to the front piece and the side backs to the back pieces. I also pinned together the center back seam, stopping 8 inches below the top of the seam, which was left free for the placket. Those pieces were then sewn and finished using my chosen seam finishing method, which is my serger. After I iron those seams open, I also serge the hem. Now it was time to attach the pockets. I pinned the pocket right sides to right sides on either side of the side seam and sewed. What you see me doing here with the white twill tape is finishing the part of the seam that I couldn't with my serger. That was then sewn down by hand using whip stitches. I then pinned and sewed around the perimeter of the pocket and carried the stitching down the rest of the side seam, joining the side front and side back together. I then finished the remainder of the seam using again white twill tape sewn down by hand using whip stitches. After the pockets were attached, I turned my attention to the hem facing, which I backed with Tarlatan, a period stiffener which consists of glued cotton fibers. After cutting each facing piece out of tarlatan, I pinned it to its corresponding facing piece and sewed all of them together into a tube. I then ironed each seam open and trimmed away the tarlatan from the seam to reduce bulk in that area. Now it was time to attach the hem facing to the skirt itself. They were attached right sides together, matching seam lines, and were sewn using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I also understitched the hem facing, which encourages the hem facing to turn inwards. I then marked a 1/2 inch away from the top of the hem facing and ironed it towards the hem of the skirt. Then I turned the hem facing upwards, ironed it, and pinned it in place. I then attached the upper edge of the hem facing to the skirt using whip stitches off camera. Now it was time to work on the waistband, which I backed with the same tarlatan I used for the hem facing. I marked a 1/2 inch away from one edge of the waistband using chalk and ironed it. That will become the inner part of the waistband. I also marked 1/2 inch away from either end, which is the seam allowance of the waistband. I then pinned the skirt to the waistband and gathered it in between the notches on the back piece to fit. The waistband was then sewn by machine using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I also sewed the ends of the waistband closed, thus finishing them. I then ironed the waistband in half, folding it over the raw edge of the waist seam and pinned it in place. The waistband was finished off camera by hand using whip stitches. Now I totally lost the footage of attaching the placket, but here are some close-ups. The placket piece was folded in half to make an extension and sewn to the left side of the back seam. The extension is to hide the petticoats when the skirt is worn, and the right side was simply finished with an extra piece of fabric. The last step, which is also shown here, was the closures, for which I chose 2, size 2, hook and eyes.
And settle down. If I ever get a chance to sneak away from town, then I'll spend my busman's holiday on the Atchison Topeka and the Santa Fe.
All aboard!
All aboard!
We came across the country licking